I have a dream.
It's one small step for man.
I am the greatest.
You want something, go get it. Period.
What's up, my fellow dreamers, doers, achievers? This is episode number 8 of the Dream Big podcast, and I just want to take some time to thank you for all tuning in for another episode of this podcast. It truly means a lot that you guys are giving us feedback, reviews, and extreme support. It truly means a lot, and thank you from the bottom of my heart. And there's many changes coming soon. We have updates on equipment, we have updates on software, and we want to make this the best listening experience possible for you guys. So those are some changes being made in the future, so thank you so much. To kick it off, we're going to talk about a quote from Pablo Picasso when he once said, "The meaning of life is to find your gift. The purpose of life is to give it away." And this episode is going to be a little different in the intro. It's a special one, so we thought we would take some time to highlight some special sponsors of ours. We have 2 sponsors who align perfectly with what we're doing, what our dreams and aspirations are for Dream Big. One of our goals is to change the educational system, so both of these sponsors are doing just that with their missions, with their products and services. So to start it off, we're going to talk about one of our first sponsors, StuNited. This is an app for students to match and connect based on their academic skill sets. Struggling in English but good in math? StuNited will provide you with a card stack of other users to swipe on. Swipe right on students that complement your skills and find your StuMate today. You can find them on the App Store since it is only available on iOS for now. Android will be coming soon. Many changes are coming. And on social media, you can follow them at StuNited app or StuNited.com. The second sponsor we want to talk about is Tech Roots Academy. Tech Roots is a company that goes to schools, libraries, and conducts camps in which they teach young kids the basics of computer programming. They already have 65 locations and have helped 3,000 students in only 2 years. The founders saw a lack of education in the field of programming within the educational system. So they're filling that gap by educating children as much as possible and making sure those skills are rooted in them throughout their lives. To learn more, you can follow Tech Roots on social media at tech_roots and at techrootsacademy.com. And before we start this episode, in our interview, we want to give a little highlight of the person we're interviewing and his accomplishments, and you will be astonished by what he's achieved. So Colin, in a short time on this earth and yo-yoing in general, he's had significant accomplishments. I'll just give you a list right here. He's gotten 6th place in the 1A final during the 2015 U.S. National Yo-Yo Contest, 3rd place in the 1A final during 2016 U.S. Nationals, 1st place in the 3A final during the MER 2017 Yo-Yo Contest, 2nd place in the 1A final during the MER 2017 Yo-Yo Contest, and as of recently, 1st at VA Stage in Richmond, Virginia. So just a small list of accomplishments that highlight Colin's talent and his abilities, and he is more than that too. You'll see, and hopefully you enjoy this interview and get a lot out of it. Have a good listening experience. So, Colin, we've been connecting lately. Obviously, I interviewed you before for a blog for Dream Big, but awesome to actually have you here. You know,
Yeah, man. Thank you for the opportunity.
Yeah, no problem at all. Just growing closer and closer. But I really got to know Colin, and he's more than just a world champion in yo-yoing. He is just as good of a person as he is in yo-yoing. But you want to start off by telling the people listening, like, your background, where you came from, how you ended up here, and a little bit about yo-yoing in general?
Yeah, sure. So, obviously, as stated, my name is Colin. I'm from Cleveland, but now I'm here in Philly at Drexel. Reason why is just because Drexel has an awesome co-op program, and also, for the other reason, yo-yoing A lot of my friends that I work with in Yoyo live out here, so it's an awesome opportunity to be able to meet up with them often and collaborate on stuff. And one thing especially that we collaborate on is a podcast as well called the Skills Podcast, which is for yo-yoers, the first competitive yo-yoer-oriented podcast. So it's been awesome improving the podcast and also working with Anthony on working on his podcast as well.
Awesome. Yeah, and I know yo-yoing has been a big part of your life since you were young.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, in one article I read, it was at a young age, this is what your mom said, you memorized the alphabet forward and back. Like, you always had that sense of curiosity and
For
memorization.
Sure.
So what, like, sparked that interest in yo-yoing and all that stuff?
So I think for yo-yoing, the thing is that when you start out, it seems like the possibilities are endless. It's not a finite activity to do. There's always more you can learn. You can always get better. And I think that challenge and always growing is something that really attracted me as a person. The opportunity to be able to learn more and do more and improve your skill is something that obviously feels very good when you get better at. So yo-yoing was perfect in that regard for me.
Yeah, definitely. The one quote I thought about the other day that relates to what you just said is, although this life is finite, the possibilities in this life are infinite. So I'm sure,
that's
like,
awesome.
yeah, all the possibilities you had. You want to highlight any possibilities or opportunities you had in terms of, like, traveling with that, or
for sure.
people you met?
So
I'm sure there's a bunch.
Yeah, I started in 2011, and by 2012 I was able to go to my first world competition in Florida at the time. And then going forward the next year I also went. It was in Florida again. And then in 2015 I had the opportunity to go to Tokyo, Japan for the world competition.
Wow.
Got to make finals there. The next year was actually in my hometown, Cleveland. Not too sure why, but it was still a good time regardless. Got my highest ranking there, which was 13th in the world. And then last year I got to go to Iceland. And besides that, I've also had other opportunities to travel, of course, across the country and stuff. But yeah, as far as travel is concerned, yo-yoing is definitely one of the most underrated activities for that.
Oh, for sure. And what do you think is the best place, if you had to pick one out of every single place you went to? I know it's tough. But, like, I know, like, all these places, but
yeah. Honestly, I'm gonna have to go with Japan, probably. Yeah.
That's awesome. And anything in particular about it, or just?
I think it was just because in the culture of yo-yoing, I think Japan is kind of like the mecca, it seems, to where the best of the best are. So I think part of it had to do with me being able to just be there in general and really, like, compete on the stage with all these other people. But also just as an area as a whole, Japan is breathtaking, you know. Not very many people speak English, so that's obviously some sort of setback, but it's also a good takeaway in that you get to kind of absorb the other things in life just besides other people living there. So it was fun.
Yeah, definitely. Before we touch on the other things, I want to bring it back to that. What I talked about in the previous interview with my friend. Traveling is so important for you to, like, expose yourself to these other cultures, you know, other places. Like, obviously you might not know the language, but just seeing how they interact, it's like a different world.
Yeah, and that's how, I completely agree. That's how you grow as a person, really, probably one of the best ways.
Mm-hmm. And in terms of the yo-yoing process, I know some people might not know, but, like, say you had a competition, like, how would it work? You know, you get there and everything.
Yeah, so the way that the competitions work is that the people will register for the event and go. And depending on how big the contest is, sometimes you will have to do a preliminary routine, which is 1 minute on stage, choreographed to music, where basically you try to hit as many tricks as possible and not miss very many tricks at all, really. And then if you advance to the finals, which are usually 2 minutes or 3 minutes, you do another routine similar to that.
Okay. And I'm sure the competition is unreal. I'm sure the kids are really good. Yeah. So that being under pressure, I'm sure has been another lesson, along with the many that has built you into the person you are.
For sure. And it's funny because the whole under pressure thing is something that people ask a lot about. And for me to kind of speak in front of an audience under pressure is a whole different ballgame for me than yo-yoing for some reason. I think it has to do with the kind of way I'm expressing myself. When you practice for a routine for yo-yoing and you have the opportunity to do it on stage, you kind of get almost some sort of like an adrenaline rush with like you being in the moment, you know. All of your work is culminating to this. And that whole under pressure thing, I can't say that I feel it every time, honestly. It's almost random. I'm not really sure what it's based off of, but it definitely does hit you sometimes, but not always in a bad way. I think it does just as much good as it does bad.
Yeah, that adrenaline rush, do you think, going back, do you think it's a, like, art form in a sense? Because I know you, like, create the music, like, you go by the music, the patterns, and you, like, mold it into the thing you want.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. I think the way that people have always kind of outlined yo-yo is that it's kind of like half sport, half art in a sense. You're putting together a routine, and it is a work of art as a whole, with the music, with the stage movements you do, and of course the tricks. But also the way that people build their routines is to score the highest, right? So it's also a sport in the sense that people are kind of reaching to get to that top point, People are always trying to one-up each other on stage and stuff like that. So it is an art, but I think it also is resemblant to a game like basketball or something to where you have to act under pressure, under adrenaline to do well.
Yeah. And that's awesome. Thanks for that. And it is a sport. So in sports, you have to, in some sense, as you level up more and more, you have to incorporate that business type mindset. And I'm sure if you want to touch on like this, we'll get into the sponsors and the business side you have learned. Yeah. But I'm sure it's incredible, not just like the lessons itself, but like on the other spectrum of this side of stuff.
Yeah, so that's a good point because competitive yo-yoing is actually kind of almost like a marketing game as well. You have to kind of market yourself to be one of the best for the judges and the audience to think that you're really good. And as weird as that sounds, it's true. And like you said, it does resemble other sports with, just how you have to grow to kind of become more of a business person. And I think growing yourself as a business in yo-yoing, either individually or with a sponsor, does improve your game.
Yeah, no, and the experience you probably have already, 19, right? 19 years old, you started when you were 11 or 10? Yeah. So, like, just all that experience up to this point, I'm sure a lot of kids don't get the handling of the money or the handling of talking to sponsors and all that. I know your first sponsor was Dunkin', right? And you want to talk about how, like, you leveled up with Dunkin' to Reese's and stuff?
So yeah, Dunkin' was my first sponsor. They're known as kind of, I guess, the biggest yo-yo company in the world. If you've seen a yo-yo, it's probably one of theirs, one of those cheap plastic yo-yos. But they also do make competitive yo-yos that I used. So I joined Dunkin' as a young 14-year-old, and it was my first sponsorship. I spent 3 years trying to get on that brand, pretty much my whole yo-yo career, trying to get on this company. It was local to me where I lived, and, it just grew with me as I grew as a yo-yo player. So I joined Dunkin', and this was my first sponsorship, so I was starting to kind of learn what sponsorship really was. And the thing is that Dunkin' is the biggest corporate business in the yo-yo community, so the way that their sponsorship works is kind of to where the point that as a sponsored player, you don't really have much input in what the company does. And even though as a young 14-year-old, you wouldn't really think that that's something that you would kind of consider as a factor, it was to me, and it was a good experience for sure. I learned a lot, of course. A lot of big changes happened with the company, so it was kind of my first experience with adjusting to change. But it kind of left me feeling that I wanted to be more involved into a brand. So I then joined a different company called Recess, actually local to the Philadelphia area. And Recess was a very different sponsor in terms of how things worked. Very, very, very player-oriented. We had a lot of say with how the company worked, how they made yo-yos and whatnot. And it was another awesome experience, but as time goes on, you always want to grow bigger. So I ended up joining a new sponsor recently called Unparalleled.
Very nice yo-yos. I've seen them.
Thank you.
Even though I'm not in the yo-yo community, they look kind of nice.
Yeah. Very, very, very focused on just making the best yo-yos. And I think ultimately, as a competitor, that's what I want the most. Marketing is nice, branding is nice, but having just a no-frills, really, really good competitive yo-yo to use, just the best technology in the game, is something that I do value. And being with that, I also do have a lot of input. So the situation I'm in right now is actually very, very ideal. But as you mentioned with sponsorships, there is a lot to learn. And in yo-yoing, I think it's one of the best kind of exposures to kind of get into that, because it isn't very difficult to get sponsored, really. It may take time, but the lessons you learn in terms of business, marketing yourself, and marketing a brand super, super, super valuable.
Yeah, and I'm no like, of course, today it's so important to create that personal brand.
Mhm.
So I'm sure that's what we have to do in terms of
Yeah.
getting the sponsors and all that. And then also in like grand scheme of things was, you know, looking at you when you first started, like videos of you doing yo-yo and like you telling me what you did when you were 11 and just started when you joined the Cleveland Yo-Yo Club, right?
Mhm,
And then
yeah.
looking at you now, it's like this your extreme growth.
Yeah.
Was it always your plan to get this big, or like did you have a dream of, you know, getting this far, or was it just you just
Yeah,
kept
well,
working at it, kept chipping away?
And when you start out, you really don't know that this all exists at all. You know, when I bought my first yo-yo, I had no idea that I would be traveling around the world competing at all these yo-yo contests. But, you know, as you slowly get better and better, you start to realize all of these things that come with it. And you do kind of progressively build your own goal, build your own kind of high point, your end game in yo-yoing. And I think as a player that's still growing, honestly, you know, what I considered my end goal in yo-yoing 2 years ago is way different than what I consider it as now.
Yeah.
So it's always changing.
Yeah, exactly. That's so true. Your goals are always changing around, you know, where you're at in life.
Yep.
And in terms of like what we are here at Dream Big,
Mhm.
what if you can give some advice? You know, you've really leveled up. You've reached a top stage. What advice can you give in terms of getting towards that goal or accomplishing certain things?
Yeah.
Just like in terms of action or habits or just whatever you think and what you've done.
So I think the way you have to look at it in a competitive field is that only one person can get first place. And as obvious as that is, it really does show a lesson in that no matter how hard you try, there is a pretty strong possibility that someone will always try harder. Someone will always be better than you. And even though not getting first place isn't very fun, you have to take it as sort of a sign of progress, no matter if you did worse than the last time or better. It's always something different, and the more experiences you have, you know, doing different levels of, I guess, doing a good freestyle, doing a poor freestyle, so on, you have to realize that the more and more time you get on stage, or I guess any other way you would apply this in life, the more you know in general, and everyone's time does come, you know. I've hit my successes already. Honestly, if I peaked already in yo-yoing, I would be happy with where I am competitively, to say the least. So I think that really it's just because you have a poor experience, you need to take it as a lesson that you can always do better than that.
Yeah, and there's something that comes to mind. It's you never fail. You either win or you learn. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I think that's awesome in terms of always growing. I mean, people sometimes, and just like not even sports, like life in general, they always get down about themselves, about not doing something, but they should take a step back and look at how far they've come.
Oh, yeah.
You know, have that balance.
Yeah, I have like a perfect example of this, really. So when I got to travel to Japan for the World Yo-Yo Contest, the way that the World Contest is set up is something much more complex in terms of how you have to get to the finals. So me personally, I had to go through 3 rounds before I hit the finals. I was not qualified to anything for this competition, so I had to start at the very bottom. And traveling across the world to start at the very bottom, it really seems like everything's at stake. Like, did I just spend, $1,500 on a flight, $500 on a hotel for me not to make it out of the first round potentially? So it's scary, you know. You're really putting all of your eggs into one basket when you do that. But I practiced all summer for the event, and I managed to make it all the way to the finals. And it was a shock to everybody. But to yourself, you obviously know that you deserve it. And I think people get that too. But anyways, so I made it all the way to finals. I did almost perfect in every single round, which is rare. And then in finals, I had a very, very big mistake in the beginning of my freestyle, something that has never happened. Basically, I got a knot in my yo-yo and I had to switch, which is like one of the worst mistakes you can do. So it's unfortunate. And I did the rest of my freestyle, obviously toughed through it, did pretty well besides that, but still I got off stage feeling very, very, very upset at myself. Like, I just blew it on the biggest stage in the world. Like, I probably got last place. Luckily, I didn't, but I felt like the worst. But then I just realized, you know, I still made it all the way to the finals. Like, out of all the people that competed here, I was one of the top 18 that is on that finals stage. So you have to kind of take the lessons is that even though your final result may not be a success, what built up to it can be a success, whether that be in the practice or even just other stuff like that. But
Yeah. No, that's a great story. Thank you for highlighting that.
yeah, for sure.
That's so important. It just applies directly to, people's lives in general, what they can do and use. And then in terms of like down the road, are you looking to do this for like another decade per se, or do you want to
okay.
branch off into, I know you said possibly judging or?
Yeah, so as a competitor, I think my situation right now is pretty rare to where I compete about, 60 to 70% of the time, and I already judge now. So the other time when I'm not competing, I'm judging a contest. So I think my transition to fully judging will probably be a little bit sooner than average, which is fine. I don't think it really is anything bad. It's giving back to yo-yoing in a different way. But I don't know. I think as a competitor, it's hard to kind of predict how much longer I'll be doing it. Could be, it could be 3 years, could be 5 years, could be 10. But I think that yo-yo players all are aware of the fact that you can never just straight up quit what you do, and especially with yo-yoing. Like, if you're playing with a toy, you can't just be like, all right, I'm done playing with this toy forever. Like, I've learned all of this, but it's just a waste of time. You can't do that. That's not how it works. Like, you'll always retain that knowledge. It's like riding a bike. Like, and when you do it, it's always fun. So it's not... when people go to quit that, they're just saying, oh, I don't want to have any more fun with this. And obviously that's not like an ideal way of thinking. So for me, I think that as a competitor, my time may not be much longer, but I will always play a role in the yo-yo world somehow.
So to end the podcast, I always ask each person I'm interviewing, what's one dream you want to accomplish in life, whether it be at any time in your life. And usually it's like a ridiculous goal that seems absurd, but we're all capable of doing it. So I'll ask, what's one dream you want to accomplish, Colin, and then what are you going to do to get there?
So for me, I think morally my biggest dream is to make something I'm a part of better. And as, basic and simple as that sounds, I think that, in a more specific lens, in terms of yo-yoing, I would love to make the yo-yo community a more optimized way, or a more optimized organization in terms of how competitions are judged or the way that people produce content, anything like that, really. I think that if all of us work to just make something that we're interested in better, then everything will naturally just improve. And I think that's a really good thing to strive for.
Awesome. Yeah, no, and I know you said it sounds small, but it's so true. Like, in that simplicity, just making something better than it is very true. And also, the people listening, I'm sure they want to follow you, see what you're up to lately. So is there any other social media they can follow you on, any place they can follow you on?
Yeah, I have an Instagram account, and it is at Colin Beckford, all one word.
Okay, I'll tag that in the, or I'll put that in the description for you guys.
Yep.
And then for the Scales Collective, if they ever want to take a peek at that.
My podcast that I personally do, you could follow us on Instagram at Scales Collective, all one word.
Awesome. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this episode and what we are doing at Dream Big, it would mean a lot if you can become more involved with the Dream Big community. You can do so by subscribing to this podcast on any of the following podcasting platforms. We're on 8 channels, 8 different platforms. Our channel on YouTube at Dream Big & Co. And follow us on social media at Dream Big & Co. That will all be in the show notes, so you'll see that and you can get a direct link to those platforms. Most importantly, at the end of the day, we ultimately do this for you to add value to your lives. So if there's anything you like, dislike, or want changed, please rate this episode and leave a review. Like I said, it would truly mean a lot. And thank you, and have a great one.
The podcast you just heard was made using Anchor. Ever thought about making your own podcast? Anchor makes it really easy for anyone to get started. It's a one-stop shop for recording, hosting, and distributing podcasts. Best of all, it's 100% free. Sign up now at anchor.fm/new. That's anchor.fm/new to get started.